Welcome to What Are You Noticing with Kish and Mitra. My co-host is Kish. She is a coach, relatefulness facilitator, and improv teacher.
My co-host is Mitra. He is a Dharma teacher, relatefulness facilitator, and coach. In this podcast, we're going to be covering a wide range of topics such as
Relationships,
insights from coaching and facilitation,
spirituality,
living a good life,
Asian American life,
and what's happening for us on our spiritual journeys. Without any further ado, we hope you enjoy the episode. Good evening, Mitra.
Good evening.
So I called my mom today for the first time in 9 months, and we were just talking a little bit before this about what kind of relationship do we want to have with our parents. And I feel like this is a topic that really ties into the spirituality theme and also the Asian American theme.
Yeah, absolutely.
Relationships.
Yeah. And how much that relationship impacted probably our entire life path and what we're looking for now.
Yeah.
You said you talked to your mom today? Was it a conversation or like a voice memo or?
I called her today. Yesterday was my birthday, and I said I would call her on my birthday. It ended up not working out timing-wise, so I called her today, which was also the anniversary of my grandma's passing, her mom.
Oh, wow.
And some context is my parents are divorced, and I never really had a good relationship with my dad growing up. My mom and I were always closer, but it's been ups and downs, especially in the past 10 years.
Totally.
And last year she visited me in Austin, and it was just a really difficult trip for a number of reasons. And after that, I decided it would be best to take some time away from the relationship and kind of work on healing and stuff so that I could enter the relationship from a better perspective,
Totally.
holding a better perspective. And I felt like it was time to reach out to her, and it was still very difficult. It was a very difficult conversation.
Yeah, without sharing personal details, what was the difficulty? Was it falling into old patterns, or was it feeling unseen, or something else?
I think it was seeing the patterns of our relationship dynamic and also seeing her patterns more clearly because I had some space from it. I was still getting triggered, but it was a lot less than before. I guess specifically with my relationship to her, there's so many ways that I want her to be different. And there's so many ways that I want to be treated in that relationship and that I've wanted to be treated since I was a kid. And finally taking in the reality of she doesn't treat me that way. She might not be capable of acting in a way that I want my parent to act.
Totally.
That brings up a lot of grief. And so that was experiencing the challenging aspects of the relationship, but then also feeling all the grief of, oh, this wasn't the way that I wanted it to be when I was younger.
Yeah, it seems like such a relatable experience of I wish my parents attuned to me in the ways I needed and were there in the way that they weren't. And to some extent, I guess every parent ultimately fails to live up to the kid's ideal. But curious, how do you have a sense of how do you hold that disappointment? How do you hold that relationship going forward? Or how do you navigate that?
Yeah, it feels like something that I am still trying to figure out because, as you mentioned before the call, there's a tendency to go from one extreme to the other extreme. And I think historically, my inclination and my tendency has been to kind of step up as the parent in that relationship. So hold space for her, try to understand her perspective, try to meet her needs so that I can get my needs met. And, you know, from that place, my idea moving forward is like somehow get her some help. Like get her a therapist or a coach or just someone who's going to help her work on some of the things that she has, like some of the anxiety, fear, nervous system dysregulation, and kind of help her with the healing. But I don't want to be in that position anymore where I'm like parenting her and trying to get her to change. I don't know,
Right.
but I
Right.
think that what might be more healthy, and I'm curious your thoughts, is to grieve that it's not going to be the way that I want it to be, and that it wasn't the way that I wanted it to be, and try to just move into more acceptance of that and try to really get my needs met in other relationships, and maybe set boundaries in that relationship.
Totally. Yeah, what's coming to mind is like how much I'm thinking back to college and post-college and wishing that, like, at least in my friend group, we didn't really talk about our relationship with our parents that much. And even if we did, I don't feel like it would feel as relatable because it somehow felt like my family system was more unique. And I think it's something about being immigrants and being minority and all this stuff. And I think for a lot of years, I had this stuck polarity where a part of me resented having certain impossible expectations put on me, and this like perfect Korean ideal son archetype put on me that I didn't feel like was fair, but also still deep down wanting their approval and wanting to be a good son to them and like make them proud. And so I think I was stuck for so many years and would feel both justified in my anger but also ashamed of it through a lot of my 20s. And I think in my family system, my parents used shaming, like you had to do certain things to help out or else you're a bad child. And I think I spent a lot of my 20s trying to figure out that I'm actually a good person deep down, and then actually like started owning the need for distance from my parents and the justified parts of my child that felt angry at them. Not that I wanted to like hurt them or like wanted to completely remove connection, but I needed to own the part of me that was upset and hold that kid that was like really angry at what he didn't get. And now similarly, I'm kind of in a weird position now where like I don't see my parents as often or talk to them as often as I used to. And there is the desire to connect, but there's such like a cultural and like historic sort of gulf. And I'm like, what's actually realistic or practical? What's actually a good relationship could be without like expecting me to change fundamentally and without expecting them to change fundamentally. But is there any low-hanging fruit? Can we just like play a board game or watch Korean shows together, or maybe I only stay like 2 days max there or something, you know? So I've been really wondering about that.
Yeah, it sounds like what you were describing was doing some reparenting of your inner parts yourself.
Totally. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was really hard for me to own, I think, because there's a classic like immigrant Asian trope of like my parents sacrificed so much for me and worked so hard and always worked to give me a good education and at least like physically, materially, a better life than they did. But to then be like, well, you didn't emotionally take care of me, I think for like a lot of my adolescence, that was like hard to really own without feeling bad or ashamed of.
Yeah. That's so relatable for me.
Totally.
And it reminds me of something that I thought when you were speaking earlier too about like conditional versus unconditional love. And I feel like that need for approval, which I also had, it's getting to some sort of conditional love
Yeah. It also makes me remember, like, I remember once I was doing a meditation retreat and I was really thinking about my parents, and there are certain things my parents really want for me. Like, they would love if I, like, moved back home or, like, got like a normal tech job or something, brought home, like, children. But when I really considered it, I realized even if I did those things, my parents actually wouldn't be happy. And so there was a part of me that's like hearing what they want and me feeling the the need to fulfill it to make them happy. But then when I really considered, I was like, that actually wouldn't. I know for sure that would not actually make them happy. It sort of like eased something in me of like I don't think they actually know what they want, and that's I don't think that's actually it. And so
And also, it's bringing up the question of if it's really possible for something outside of yourself to make you genuinely happy.
hmm totally.
Like, I feel like it might for a period of time, but nothing's going to replace you doing it yourself.
hmm Yeah, it brings to mind sort of like what's the inner relationships and then like what are the outer relationships, and I think there's a sense of like my parents are so overjoyed when I'm around, partly because I think parents just love their children, but also they don't have a great relationship with each other. It's not as like vibrant, but they like kind of like what you said about like parenting your parents. There's like a sense of like I can provide a different type of relationship, and that's a lot more vibrant for them.
Mm-hmm.
So it's also bringing to mind this question of like a lot of times when I work with clients, a lot of them kind of like classic therapy stuff of like tracing back all their problems to their parents and how they were raised. But then it's really easy to get stuck at this like kind of like victim child, like helpless child thing of just like, why aren't my parents better? And like, if they were just better, then I would be okay or something. It's like it doesn't work. you know?
I think it's helpful to do that. It can be helpful to do
Mm-hmm.
that for a period of time because, like you said,
Mm-hmm.
it could be a way to get out of that feeling of shame,
Mm-hmm.
to let yourself feel those feelings of like anger or disappointment or something.
Totally.
And I think it is true that the way that we're raised
Mm-hmm.
and who we're raised by and the environment and everything has a huge impact on the way that we approach the world when we're
Mm.
older,
Totally.
like the attitudes and the trust that we have, our nervous system.
Mm-hmm. Totally.
At the same time, it's something it's your own responsibility. Like,
Mm-hmm.
now,
Mm-hmm.
how do I live the kind of life that I want to live, and how do I see the world the way that is really positive for me?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like this quote. I forget the author, but it was something like it was like really shitty things happen to you, and it's not your fault that that happened, but it is your responsibility now of what do you do about it. And it's like it's not fair and it's not right, but that's how it is. And it's been
Yeah.
interesting for me noticing like the life patterns of in my family. We worked so hard, and there was like very little time for like relaxation or recreation. And then now like having to learn like what actually is a purely relaxing recreational activity that's not like this will also benefit me in XYZ ways. um
Okay, yeah.
you know
Have
it's
you
been
found those?
so far the two that in my mind are really hard to justify as like productivity or somehow good in some other weird way is like taking long baths and singing in a choir, where I'm like
Mm,
I'm not learning anything really, and this is probably not going to help me in any other way besides getting more relaxed right now, which is really valuable. But it's not like this will then help me in dating or like this will then help me in my career or something. It's just like
okay.
this is just feels good for me to do.
Yeah. I can't tell if I have an integrated perspective or if I'm still viewing things from the productivity mindset.
Mm.
I feel like when you said those things, I was just like, oh yeah, but that's gonna, help you relax and help you
Totally.
like have fun or whatever, and then that's gonna help you not be burnt out, and that's gonna help you show up better in other aspects of your life.
Yeah, yeah, it's true. It's definitely true. Yeah, it's interesting. Is that is that productivity or is that like higher order like TL turquoise development? But yeah.
I don't know. I do think that relaxation and doing things that are nourishing, I'm starting to see that they're really good in and of themselves.
Mm-hmm. It's
And
true.
it reminded me of something that I noticed in my call with my mom today.
Hmm.
I think I noticed it for the first time ever.
Hmm.
I realized, oh, she has this tendency to move towards destabilization and
Yeah.
nervous system dysregulation as opposed to like building up a solid foundation first. And I'm the same way.
Mm. Mm.
Like, I don't know if you probably already know this. Like, I can really easily just go to, oh, what's the deeper cut, and just potentially destabilize myself.
Oh, that's so interesting. I never considered it as destabilization, but that's really interesting.
I noticed that after I moved to Austin that
Huh.
sometimes I would go to a session and then I would just be
Mm.
destabilized for a week. Like, I would just be off for a week.
Huh.
A relatefulness session.
Is it like you're drilling down to like trying to undercut things, or like what's the
It's it's maybe not so much of an impulse as a lack of an impulse.
Hmm.
It's a lack of an impulse to regulate or ground myself, let's say. So like you do
Interesting.
something in your coaching, which I've also learned about, which is find a positive
Mm-hmm.
resource or find
Right.
something in your environment that's neutral so that you can always return to that. And I
Mm-hmm.
think for a lot of my life, I didn't have that impulse.
Hmm. That's so interesting. I was just talking to another coach yesterday where we were debating about the question of like window of tolerance, where it's like
Yes, yeah, yeah.
staying within like what's actually manageable. And then we were arguing in a weird way because we've had this debate many times where we actually flipped positions where I was arguing there is a window of tolerance and he was arguing maybe we're underestimating what's actually possible, especially in a coaching engagement or like a therapeutic context where the coach can kind of be the resource anchor for the client. Like if you fully go into the destabilization, you might actually just find stability. At least that's what he was arguing. And then I was
Mm,
arguing, well, sometimes the part just gets so ramped up that you just get destabilized. And so,
mm. I think that's a good question. I can see things from both perspectives. And
mm-hmm.
I do agree that just specifically with the window of tolerance, the way to increase the window of tolerance is to add more positive resources into the system.
Mm-hmm. Totally.
And so it
That's,
makes sense that it would be bigger when you're with a
mm-hmm.
coach.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It also reminds me, I just started this new book that came out recently called Feel Good Productivity, that in certain ways are kind of like obvious teachings in there, but I think in the productivity space is actually kind of innovative, even though it's kind of obvious, where he says things like making yourself feel good will actually make you more productive, or like you'll do things better if you're having fun, rather than like the willpower, grind it out, like just suck it up if it's not going well and just keep pushing, which is like kind of obvious, but somehow I think in the productivity space, especially with like tiger moms and everything, there is that sense of like if it's hard, you just keep going and just try harder, and it doesn't matter how you feel.
Yeah. I feel like that would be an argument in favor of not drilling down, like the window of
Mm-hmm.
tolerance being a little bit smaller.
Totally.
I don't think
Totally.
it's good to force things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It makes me think about the pattern I inherited, and I think the one I got from my mom is she often is like a chronic person that worries about things. And so
Same.
no matter what happens, there's like, you know, it's like
Yeah.
it's cold outside. Make sure you have a sweater. It's snowing. You gotta make sure you have good tires. Whatever it is, it's always like there's a danger.
It took you a while to realize that you have that too, or?
Yeah, that I have that. That's where I got the pattern, and that's really strong.
Yeah, I relate. Like, I have the same pattern, and Annabeth's actually been helping me with this. Sometimes
Mm.
we'll lead a warm-up exercise during our Relateful Flow evenings, and I'll bring up this concern I have, like, oh, what if this happens, blah, blah, blah. I think we should do it this way. And then she says something like, why don't we deal with that if it actually happens?
Right.
And
Such
I
a good teacher.
appreciate that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I really appreciate that attitude. Also, another thing that I've learned from her, which I'm reminded of because Harris got me a notebook for my birthday, and when I opened it, we both just started cracking up. It says, "What if it all works out?" One thing that I've learned from Annabeth
Yeah,
is
for sure.
your inner world, does it play fair? If you're worrying about things going poorly all the time, is there also a part of you that, worry might not be the right word, but anticipates things going really well as well?
So I guess before the call, we were talking about like this broader picture of like learning to love our loved ones for who they are rather than waiting for them to have to change. I wonder if that's showing up in your life right now.
It's definitely showing up with myself and my mother. There's a pull towards having a relationship with her, and yet when I'm in connection with her, that desire for her to be different comes up so strongly.
It's interesting because I've noticed it even in micro ways with the people I live with, like my housemates. There's certain ways in which I can like easily blame them in my head for not being the right way and then thinking they should become the right way. But I don't necessarily always tell them what's going on in my head. And so it's like I'm like feeding my own pattern of expectation and suffering.
Yeah. There's a difference that I make, though, I think it's fair with relationships you can't choose. So, like with your parents, you can't choose them. It's like a take it or leave it kind of situation. But I feel like with my relationships and with my partner, it's really important for me to, like yesterday, I don't know if this is kind of embarrassing. Yesterday I said to him, I want more attention.
That sounds great.
And I think it's really good in relationships, like your friendships or your romantic connections or whatever, to share when your needs aren't getting met. Because I think it's really important what happens after that. That's important to me, at least.
Totally. No, I totally agree. I think the thing that I'm pointing to that at myself is that there's like a childish way in which I can have an annoyance or dissatisfaction, but then I'm not actually giving them the feedback, and so I'm not giving them the opportunity to update and change. It's like really easy to play the child victim card of like, well, they just know they're wrong and they should do better, versus actually I worked with a client of like, I told him you should give clear call to actions, like clear steps that your partner could do to meet your needs. And so, but like you're saying, that open communication and engagement of this is what I want more of, or when you do this,
Yeah.
this really hurts.
Do you know for you what gets in the way of you expressing yourself in that way with, for instance, the people that you're living with?
It's getting better, and it's easier with some people than others. But I think partly from like my childhood and my family system of like not expecting attunement, or like actually expecting disappointment of not getting those requests met, and so like learning over time to kind of like shut down the part of me that would make those asks, because it learned that it wasn't going to get met and that disappointment was really painful. And so for me it often takes like a lot of trust, or like or like certain people I just feel a vibe with, where like I feel like it's going to be easy, and other people it's like there's that fear of like I don't know if they're actually going to meet me, and it's a lot harder. It like triggers all the family patterns around like disappointment and abandonment and rejection and all that.
What happens for you when those feelings come up?
I mean, there's different reactions. There's like minimizing and trying to just get out of the scenario, or like making jokes to make it more light. And the one I'm trying to work on more and more, which is like classic relateful practice of like sharing impact, of like actually just taking a moment to be like, really, it's usually like saying like, "Ow, that hurts," and I don't know if you meant this, but this is how I heard it or felt it, and giving the other person like the immediate feedback of like, when you do this, this is how I perceive it, or this is how it impacts me. And so I'm trying to get much better at that sort of instant feedback. Not defensive, and it's not reactive, and it's not trying to make the situation different. It's just like being with the immediate impact, and
Yeah.
willingness to share it when it's like safe.
Yeah. That's very hard to do. Like I definitely aspire to be able to show up and be present even when unexpected disappointment or other difficult feelings come up.
Totally. Yeah.
I don't have a lot of similar experiences in my life right now with my relationships, aside from with my mom. But one thing that I have been trying to work on recently is face that fear of disappointment. I'm taking this enrollment course right now with Peter Benjamin through the Avalon Coaching Institute. And part of the homework, which admittedly I've been a little behind on, but I'm still trying to do it, is collecting no's. And I imagine you have this too, just based on what you just shared. Like, it can be hard to make requests for me. First of all, because I'm not always connected to what I want. And then second of all, because I'm afraid of getting a no. And so I shut myself down preemptively. And earlier this week, I went to watch this dance performance, and this lady was sitting in front of me wearing kind of like a tall beanie. And it was obstructing my view. I could have just swapped seats with Harris because he's taller than me and he was sitting next to me. But I wanted to practice because it's not something that I would do, really. I just suck it up. Blame myself for like not getting a better seat or whatever. But then I asked her, and she probably had the worst response that she could have had. And it really shook me. And I think that's why I'm empathizing with you, because that, like, it was someone that I don't even know. It was a minor thing, like I just found another workaround, but it still really hurts when someone seemingly doesn't care about your needs. And I think that's like what was hardest for me to be with, like, oh, this person just, doesn't care at all. Like, they're not even treating me like I'm a human, really.
Totally.
And I think that's part of what awoke my determination to want to be able to be present in moments like that, where I could be like, oh, you're reacting that way, and like it's having this impact on me, and we're still humans together.
Totally. And like decoupling the how this person's reacting doesn't necessarily have to reflect on my value as like a human being or something. You know, it's like
Yeah, yeah, like not taking it personally.
totally. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's true.
But I do think also for me, part of working on finding things that are nourishing for me and not going towards destabilization habitually, I just see impermanence more and more, and I'm like, yeah, it really feels terrible now, but after this show, I'm probably going to be fine.
Totally. Yeah. Yeah, in my mind, in like parts work, that would be like talking to my little kid and being like, I hear you, this feels really bad, and also I promise, you know, half an hour from now we're gonna like be eating ice cream and things are gonna be fine. And,
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
you know,
One question that I have for you, kind of going back to the topic of your parents, you mentioned finding different activities or finding different ways of being with them that might feel better for both of you. And I'm wondering, deep down, do you feel like that's I don't know if this is a leading question, but do you feel like that's possible to find a real win-win, especially a win from your perspective?
I mean, honestly, I'm not sure. Like, I remember there was a time when I moved back in after grad school. I moved back home for like a year, and at the time, I really was confident and like optimistic, and I proposed like maybe we'll do like an hour every night where you guys can do prayer and I would like meditate with you together.
Aw.
And we did it a few times and it was like lovely, but then we stopped. And yeah, I don't know. I mean, the last time I was home, I actually at the time it was really painful, but even while it was painful, I could see a part of me saying this is actually a step in the right direction. Where like my dad and I got really upset at each other about our disconnection and about like how it's so hard to talk to each other, and it was like really painful, but it actually kind of moved from like paralysis and like overly trying to protect each other to actually like it was like a real we're actually engaged even though we're both angry at each other. And so that seems like a positive step, but I don't know, part of it's like I don't know what my parents like to do. They don't like doing a lot of things. So yeah, it's hard to like share interests or something. I think it's possible.
Yeah.
I think it's possible. Part of it's like how much effort do I actually want to put in there, and like to some extent they're just like really happy for me to be around no matter what I'm doing or what's happening. One of the things I've done is like when I go home, I try to make sure I either don't have anything on my schedule, or if I do have something, I hold it really firmly. And I'm like, sorry, this 2 hours I have to be on the Zoom call or something. Because a lot of my annoyances back in the day when I'd go home was like feeling like they were intruding on my time all the time. And it was like hard to have a boundary of like, this is my time. And so now I've gotten like a lot better at like, I'm intentionally trying not to schedule anything that could get interrupted. And if I do have anything, I'm gonna have like a very firm boundary of like, you can't bother me during this time.
Yeah.
What's that bring up for you?
It I'm just like, that's the way that you would relate to a child.
Right. Totally. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's one of my frustrations with my parents, and I can kind of step out and see the context that they grew up in and see that it was just never really possible for them to develop those emotional capacities past a certain point. And also it's frustrating for the part of me that wants them to be my parents.
Yeah. It's also this question to me of like maybe like it's like cultural norms and how different would it be if I was in Korea with them and they had like a large extended family to also get a lot of their needs met. and
Mm,
I was in a more like collective society where it was normal for us to like. There's not a lot of private space, and where a lot of people live together. Like adults live with their parents well into the until they get married. And so I think like one of the challenges of being like children of immigrants or like Asian Americans is this question of straddling multiple cultures, and like there's advantages to that, but there's also really confused challenges to it.
yeah. I'm curious if also the language barrier is because I know that you don't speak a ton of Korean.
Mm-hmm.
Is that also a challenge for you?
Yeah, no, it's a huge challenge. Yeah, like my parents, my dad in particular can speak really good English. My mom not as well, but they both don't like speaking English. And I can speak like some like I can like speak like householder Korean. Like I can like ask for food and ask for where the bathroom is and tell them like this is a good show. And I can understand a lot more than I can speak. But there definitely is like a language barrier where sometimes I'm like I've like yelled at them of like I just don't know what the hell you're telling me right now. Like every fourth word I understand the clues. It's I get the gist a lot of times, but I'm like there's a lot of vocabulary that's just kind of going
Yeah.
by me, which is really interesting. Of like how much can you communicate without actually the words, but
Mm-hmm.
but yeah, I imagine if we're like more somatic people, it would be a different dynamic. But we're not like a somatic, touchy-feely family, so we do communicate mainly through words.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty bad sometimes.
I feel like we just have so much in common that we've been talking about, and I have that too where I've never heard someone else say that. Like, I
Oh
can't
really?
understand every fourth word. I've
Mm-hmm.
just never really talked to someone about this exact experience.
Right. Right.
And I can understand with context clues and stuff, but
Right. Mm-hmm.
I think it's just really challenging because I also have basic Mandarin skills, but it's just different because I've worked so hard to cultivate my self-expression in English,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm very particular about
Mm-hmm.
what I say and how I say it, and it's like maybe more complicated words that my
Mm-hmm.
mom doesn't understand.
Right.
And then like if I were trying to express myself in Chinese, I feel like I'm falling short.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally. Yeah, it's really complicated, and it's there's also this weird other dynamic that I guess you probably don't have as much of. Like when I'm talking to my mom, my dad will butt in unhelpful ways, and when I'm talking to my dad, my mom will butt in unhelpful ways. It's
Mm,
it's almost like a drama triangle where like there's like a third person that's not helping the interaction. They think they're helping, but they're not, and so it's just a real. This one makes sense why I got so interested in like relational practice and communication and how to manage groups. But
and it even connects to what you were saying about your parents not knowing what they like.
mm-hmm.
Like just even being able to connect to yourself enough.
Mm-hmm.
That's such an important part of relational practices.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, knowing what your desire is. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, there's a weird way in which I felt a lot of compassion for my parents in times when I feel like resourced and able to like hold them in that way, and like imagine how confused and scared and everything was coming here, and like not knowing the culture, not speaking the language well, and often just being at a loss for things, or even in Korea growing up, what that was like. Um,
Yeah.
and sort of feeling that inheritance, even like almost like on a epigenetic level of like I think I got some of this probably like in utero, and so there's a part of me that's hopeful. Like I think the more comfortable I've become in my own skin and with these patterns in myself, the easier it is to kind of be with them and not. I think there's like a subtle thing where like the more confident I am in myself, the less I need to put it on them to fix it or something or to change. But yeah, there's still a lot of gnarly stuff down there. So
It's like some of the hardest stuff to accept for me.
Yeah, maybe that's okay. I don't know. There's like a part of me. I remember once growing up, I felt really bad that like I thought my parents worked. They like owned this small business and like worked really long hours, and I really thought they must hate it. And compared to my other American friends who are like lawyers and carpenters or whatever. But I remember talking to my parents once, and they were like actually felt really grateful for the work they did and how much worse it could be and how much worse it was for them in the past. And so it kind of gave me a different. It made me realize like maybe the scale that I'm using or like the measure
Mm.
I'm using my measuring stick on them, but maybe in their experience it's actually pretty good. And so
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really helpful perspective for me. Like I I take my Asian American lens and apply it to my parents' lives, but it's probably true that it was so much better than like the way things were for them.
yeah.
Yeah.
So I used to have this hope of like maybe finding some like Dharma books in Korean and then like sending them a bunch of like Buddhist stuff and be like maybe this would help them somehow or like get them into a retreat somehow and just be like just like go to this retreat and just pay attention to your mind for a week. And I think I gave up on that, but there was a fantasy for a few years where I was like, I bet they just need the right space to you know heal their trauma or something.
Yeah. I don't know if a meditation retreat would be the place
I don't think
for
so.
that.
Yeah.
I was talking to my therapist about this today because I saw her a little bit after I called my mom, and we were talking about willingness. I can't make her do something that she doesn't want to do, and I don't want to also. But I connect with your desire to share the Dharma with your parents, and I think that is one of the Buddhist teachings.
Yeah, and one of the things I really like about like religion and spirituality and Buddhism in general is this idea, like growing up like a rational, materialistic kind of atheist. I grew up Catholic, but I entered that phase in my adolescence, and I really focused on like, what can I actually do to make life better? But then there's certain things that like maybe I can't actually change, and from like an atheist point of view, that's just like suffering and bad. But then a teaching that I've recently been incorporating more in the past few years has been like even having loving thoughts about my parents actually matters, or like that maybe actually is just as important as physical changes. And so there's a weird way in which like even though I might feel hopeless or helpless about certain patterns changing immediately or in this life or something, there's a way in which I can like commit that like from a Buddhist point of view, I might be reborn and I'll be in relationship with these people many more times, and I'm like committing to having a positive intention to wanting to have a good relationship, however long that takes, or in whatever way that looks. And I know some people will be like, "Well, that's like wishful thinking or something," but it's been really helpful for me.
I think that's very beautiful.
Yeah, that's like the appropriate role of prayer or something. Like intentions do actually matter. It doesn't replace doing good physical concrete actions, but it is its own category, or it's like its own method.
Yeah, like before you might be able to want something genuinely, at least you can want to have it. I'm all about taking the steps that you can, and I totally agree with you. I don't think that it's meaningless, even if there's no physical, tangible, concrete outcome
Yeah,
yet.
totally. Yeah, I remember back at the monastery days, like a lot of times when we did that chant of compassion at the end of the night, a lot of times I think about my parents and my brother, old mentors and teachers, and it felt good. I was like, yeah, let's like send some compassion over that way. Cool.
That's nice. Cool.
Yeah. Feel wholesome.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's it for today.
Yep. Let's wrap it on a wholesome note.
Thanks for listening. This podcast was executive produced by Mitra and Kish, was written by Kish and Mitra, and performed by Mitra and Kish. Like, review, and subscribe wherever your podcasts are found.
For more information about Mitra, you can visit his website at peterxpark.com. And for more information about me, you can visit my website at kishandyou.com. Thanks for listening, and see you next time.